Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. In continuing our series on woodworking for beginners, we are going to cover the frame and panel door. Easily the most common door you're going to find in furniture construction. Takes a bit of skill and know-how. I'm going to walk you through it. I'm Rob Cosman and welcome to my shop. We make it our job to help take your woodworking to the next level. If you're new to our channel, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, which will alert you whenever we release a new video. Anytime we use a new tool or technique, we'll leave a description down below so that make it easier for you to find. All right, let's get back to work. A while ago, we did a video entitled Cabinet Doors 101. Now, if you haven't seen that, I would suggest you go back and watch it. We'll leave a link below. In that video, we cover the various styles and types of frame and panel doors. What I'm going to do today is very simple. It's going to be a mortise and tenon joint. So these will be my two stiles. These are the vertical pieces. My rails are going to be a little bit wider. Now, I'm not thrilled with the proportions in order to get a single door to fit this, but we're going to have function over form here. We're going to use, as I mentioned, a mortise and tenon. So these two rails, the horizontal pieces, will have mortises cut on, tenons cut on them, and they'll fit into a mortise, and like so. It'll be nice and strong. Very simple, very easy to do. And then my center panel is going to be made out of Douglas fir. Now this is reclaimed Douglas fir, and I'm using that as an accent wood in all of my shop furniture. But I've got to go in and I'm cutting around all kinds of defects in order to get a panel that's going to be wide enough. But it's just going to be a flat panel, really easy to do. It's going to be thin. It's only going to be 1/4 of an inch thick, which means it'll be nice and light. And with the size of this door, I want that door to be relatively light. Now this is the case, or the beginnings of it. If you missed that, we'll leave a link below, show you how we built the case. It's purpose built. We've got some protective gear that I'm always losing. So this cabinet is going to be right beside my tool cabinet, and I'll always know where this stuff is, providing I learn to put things back. So since I want this door to be inset, now what I mean by that is this door, when installed, is going to be flush with the outside of the case, whether it's a face frame or this would be considered frameless. So that's easy in terms of determining the length of some of the pieces. The upright pieces, these are called the stiles, and they're going to run the length of the inside. We will trim this to fit. We're going to do that in a separate video. This is just going to be the build. But as far as rough cutting the pieces, so this is just a little more than 23 inches. So I want my pieces to be 23 1/16. And we need two of them. That's the reason I have a 2 there. 23 1/16. And there's no rule to follow, but 2 inches is usually a pretty good size for stiles. It accommodates European style hinges well, although we're going to use traditional butt hinges on this. So I'm going to stick with the 2 inch. Now the rails are going to be a little bit wider, and the reason is if the wider the rail, the larger the tenon is, the stronger that joint's going to be. And the strength that we need is to resist any racking. You've got a fairly big door hinged on one side, a lot of downward, well, over time, there's the downward force of gravity constantly. So I think we could benefit from having a little more area there. So what we're going to do in this one is we're going to have, these are going to be 2.5 inches in width. So to determine our length, we're going to take the width of this opening and then subtract the width of the two stiles, which in this case is going to give us approximately 13 inches. And then what we need to add to that is going to be the length of our tenons. So how long do we want them to be? Well, the longer the tenon, the more glue surface you have. And your only effective glue surface is going to be on the sides. However, you don't want to go all the way through and weaken this piece. So I'm going to suggest that this one is a little better than 3/4. And because they're going to be that wide, I would say 3/4 is long enough. So that dimension minus those two stiles, 13, plus a tenon on either end, which would be a 3/4 of an inch twice, getting even 1.5 inches, brings us out to 14.5. I'm going to cut them 14 3/4 just so that we have a little bit of extra to play with. Okay, pieces are cut, milled, cut square, cut to length, finished width. So now what we need to do is figure out how we're going to cut this joint, or what we're going to do. We're going to cut a groove that's 1/4 of an inch wide, and we're going to make it, if you're chopping these by hand, then you want it to match your 1/4 inch mortise chisel. If you're doing them with a hollow chisel mortise, you're going to want it to match your hollow chisel mortise. But we will cut this groove. I'll just draw it on here roughly. Over the entire length. Of all 4 pieces. So we don't need to go very deep because it's housing the panel. We do have to allow for expansion, seasonal expansion, but I'm going to suggest that on something this wide, we can get away with maybe 3/16 of an inch in depth. Then what we're going to do is come in here and chop our mortise. So there's where our piece ends. I'll just draw that in so we can keep it straight. There's where the rail comes to. Now, we don't want to chop our mortise too close out here because there's just not enough material. So I'm going to suggest that we probably ought to come in here, I'm going to say 1/2 inch. Pine's relatively soft wood, so we come in here 1/2 inch. And we're going to make our tenon is going to be 3/4 of an inch deep. I'm just going to do it lightly. So 3/4 of an inch is going to bring us to here. Now, since we've cut a groove here, we need to leave that part on the tenon, but we'll address that in just a moment. So if we look down in through here, we're going to have this, and then I'll actually make it a little bit darker. Now on this end, you usually can't cut your mortise clean enough so that you could actually go right to the edge of the board. You're always going to see a little bit of a gap. We always want that little bit of a shoulder to hide that. However, in this case, since we were going to have that groove cut in here anyway, that's going to bring us up 3/16 of an inch. So that'll negate that problem. Yeah, if you're not following me, you will momentarily. So we're right here now. So this is going to what we're going to excavate as our mortise. Now we're going to match it over here. So this piece is also going to have a 3/16 groove cut full length, just because it's easier to do rather than trying to stop it near the end. So on this end, it's going to be 3/16 of an inch deep. Okay, so let's just transfer this up onto here. Now, we need to make a tenon that is going to go that full distance. So this is going to come back, or our shoulder is going to be back here, 3/16 of an inch. So on this face and on the opposite face, we'll have our shoulder. Here, now if you can imagine this all being gone, we've got to cut our tenon to look like this. We're going to come up 3/16 of an inch, and that will fill the gap left over there from the groove we cut to house the panel. So that would only be 3/16. And down here, once we cut through this piece, this is going to be missing anyway. So this will come right down to here. Right? So that's what we'll end up with. Now, pardon me, we got to come down farther. I misguided you here. We've got to come down into here. Remember, we allowed for this 1/2 inch of material to strengthen this piece. So this actually needs to come down to the 1/2 inch mark. But we're going to leave that small part to fill all of that gap. Right there. I don't know if I can erase that. Yeah, it might come off. All right, now that should make sense. Now, I always like to cut the mortise first. It's easier to fit the tenon to the mortise than it is to fit the mortise to the tenon. So, carry this over. This is going to be our mortise. Now, if you need help on cutting a mortise, we'll leave a link below of the video we did on hand cutting a mortise, or you can do it, as I said, with a hollow chisel mortiser. I don't recommend using a drill press and then going in and trying to pare down the sides, simply because it's really critical that the two sides of your mortise be absolutely parallel top to bottom in order to get an appropriate fit. I'm using a rip blade, and the reason is it gives you a nice flat bottom of your kerf instead of the rabbit ears that you would typically get on a combination or a crosscut blade. So I'm going to set that for what I think is about 3/16 of an inch, but I'll have to check it. And the easiest way to do this, in order to get them all the same, is cut it in the middle, and then we'll just keep flipping it and moving the fence over a little bit until our mortise chisel fits right down in there. So I'm just going to guess at the halfway point first and make sure I know I'm below 3/16 of an inch. And we'll just raise it until we get it exactly where we want it. Blade is a thin kerf and it's not a full 1/8 of an inch. I had to do the initial stage on all 4 pieces. Now I'll go in and work it until this is exactly what I want, and then just 1 pass, or 2 passes on each one, and we'll be finished. Always have to do both sides before we check it. Okay, there's our width. Now I always do a couple of extra passes just to make sure I'm nice and flat on that bottom. All right, we've got the groove cut on all 4 pieces, so I'm going to just save some time and lay these out together, flush them up. There's my markings that we drew earlier. Wait a minute now. So the first thing we want to do is cut a good, deep, clean shoulder line. Now we've got to adjust our depth, and we're going to do that by going back and checking this. I'm going to set these two pieces. I've already planed these with the exception of the outside. The inside has been planed. The outside will be planed after we've assembled it. I'll put the two of these together and measure that. I got 12 and 15/16. Now we can't have it fill the opening exactly because it would be too snug. So 12 and 7/8 would be better. So if we have 12 and 7/8, then that's going to allow us to subtract 12 and 7/8 from what we have. So there's our 12 and 7/8, and that's going to give us 1 3/4 inches. So we can do 7/8 tenons on these, which is good because I cut them a little bit deeper. So I'm going to set my marking gauge for 7/8 of an inch, which actually that's set right now. This needs to be sharp. You want nice, sharp, square shoulder lines on here. So we're going to come across the face, the edge, opposite face. Now, I'm going to just do part of this because we're going to keep some of that. And rather than have a line across there, I would just as soon not. Okay, so now we've got to get this haunch to cut just the right size so that fits. So what I'll do is go in here, register the two pieces, get that just where it belongs, and then a really light mark across there. Now I can use my marking gauge to go in and reference that. Set the gauge right in the scribe line. Get myself a line across here, across here. These could be done on the table saw as well, but it's a quick cut, so we'll do it right here. Bring in 1/2 inch. Square a line across there. Use my dovetail saw for that. Set that on its edge. Need a nice square cut. I don't want that too tight. That's a bit snug. All the glue's going to get shoved to the bottom. You want it to fit, but that's a little too much. So what I'll do is use my router plane to just take a very, very light pass a little bit tight, so I'll do the other side as well. Okay, that's better. So that's the fit that we're looking for. And just snug enough that it'll still allow us to get some glue in there. So we'll go through and do that on all four corners. Okay, let's put this together, make sure everything fits, and then we'll also use that as a means of determining the size of our panel. And remember, the reason why we did that little bit out there makes it so much easier to cut that groove all the way through instead of having to stop it somewhere back in here. Okay, I'll put a little bit of clamping pressure on it. Not so much as to leave a mark, but just enough to make sure we can pull everything tight. Size. So we've got to allow for some expansion and contraction. This is a piece of red Douglas fir. Where I am, we're getting very close to the point where it's the most humid it's going to be, which means the wood is already expanded as much as it will. So I've got 12 7/8 is the width of the opening. And we went in, just verify this, but our groove is 3/16 of an inch deep. And that's correct. So if we were to add to that, let's say we'll leave a 16th at the bottom of each. So we'll add 1/4 of an inch onto this. Remember, we got 3/16 and 3/16 is 3/8. We're going to leave a total of an 1/8, 16th on either end. So we add 1/4 onto this is going to make 13 and an 1/8. So we'll take our length, because the panel is going to sit like this. We don't need to worry about expansion lengthways. So that's 18, and we'll add, I'm going to suggest we add 5/16. That gives us a 16th of an inch over total, and that's just enough to have a little bit of wiggle room. So I've got 13 and 5/8 to work with, which means I'm going to remove a 1/2 inch. This is going to be the side you see, and there's no defects to worry about here, so it wouldn't matter where I took that material off. But if I flip it over, we've got an area right here where it's torn really bad. So I'd like to get rid of as much of that as possible. So I'm going to take the 1/2 inch off of this side. I'd like to get rid of that if I can. Okay, in order for this to fit in the groove, which is 1/4 of an inch wide, we've got a couple of options. We could continue to plane that down to 1/4 of an inch. The only problem with that is that with all of these knots, it's just going to continue to tear, and I don't really feel like dealing with that. The other option we have is to cut a rabbet. I want to see just a flat panel on the front like the others. So the rabbeted side is going to go on the inside. So what we'll do is come in here, cut what we call a rabbet. So we're going to remove this material. This has to be 1/4 of an inch to fit the groove. We need enough allowance here so that it'll absorb the expansion and contraction that will take place on this solid wood panel. So rather than try to make it close, we'll make it, if this is, we're going to go in there about 1/8 of an inch, so we'll come back a full 1/4 of an inch on the rabbet. And we can do it with the hand plane or a plane, or we can do it on the table saw. But the first thing I'm going to do is take my mortise chisel that we use to cut the mortises, and I'm going to set my marking gauge to that thickness. So now that represents that. And referencing off of the side I just finished planing, we're going to put that in the vise and cut that, or mark that all the way around. Now, since we're going to make the rabbet 1/4 inch deep in from the edges and in from the ends with the same setting, we'll just make a mark all the way around. So if we want to use a hand plane, I'm going to employ what's called a skew block plane. So I'm going to keep this so it's flat to the bench top, but just hanging over the edge ever so slightly. Lock it in place. Now my skew block plane has a fence on it with a removable side piece. When you remove the side, the blade's exposed. So it comes right out here to the edge. Actually, I have it just set beyond. And by adjusting the fence, I'm going to set it so that the point of the blade is right on that gauge line. Now that's where that torn piece is. I'm curious to see what happens when we hit that. We're going the right way, so it's okay. And we'll just take this down. Now you don't have a lot of reference in order to keep this standing plumb so that that surface remains parallel to that surface. So you just have to get a feel for it and also watch and see how this surface compares to that gauge line that we put on there. And we also need to watch this gauge line so we don't make this too thin. The panel in the same position. I just took one of the rails and I'm going to fit it so that I don't want it to rattle, but I don't want it to be so tight that it spreads this. Now what I'm going to use here is a shoulder plane, which is going to allow me to get in there. I'm going to close the throat down on this so I can avoid some of that tear out. A little bit right here. Just a little bit snug. Okay, perfect. Now I'll go around and do that on all the other three. Okay, final check. That's a good fit. Okay, so the last thing to do is to plane this inside face, and then we'll be ready to assemble. Okay, that panel is ready to put in. Now, before we assemble, to make it a little bit easier to finish, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to finish plane these two faces, so that when we assemble it, these remain proud of those, and then I just have to plane these down to meet it. Now the only problem with putting it together dry first is trying to take it apart. You always risk damaging something, especially pine. So I already know that the joints are going to fit. So I just want to verify that the panel's the right size, and the easiest way to do it is to simply set it like this. So we know we've got about 1/8 of an inch beyond the edge of the shoulders of this rail. And if we check the stile, or against the stile, we can put these in place. Love it when things work. I got to see it down here. And we've got about 5/16 of an inch, which is what we want. So our sequence will be, we'll glue this one in, then this one. Slide our panel in like that, make sure it seats properly. And then our last one is we've got to glue it two at the same time. Now when we glue these, we don't want to put any glue on the actual tenon. If we do, as you slide it in, it's going to get scraped off, and it'll all end up out here, and then it's going to squeeze in the corner and everywhere, and now you got a bit of a mess to clean up. So rather than do that, we'll do a really good job of gluing inside the mortises. So when I say inside, what we're going to do is we're going to glue this along here and along there. There's no reason to do any on the end. It's end grain. We're not going to do anything out here in the shoulders. We'll put a little bit in here and here as well, because that part right there is going to make some contact. I like a spatula for glue up simply because it allows you to more accurately place your glue, unlike a brush. And you want to coat the entire wall. Don't just squirt glue down there and expect it to end up where you want. And remember, we cut some little chamfers on the ends of the tenon so that when it's going in, it'll allow some of this glue to funnel or to slide back and remain on the cheek or on that inside edge, so we won't end up having to shove it all to the bottom. And rather than risk having that skin over before it's assembled, we'll put it together now. Okay, check that for square, although it should be because it's down tight. That's good. Remember to keep that clamp. Keep the bar of the clamp parallel to the back side of the door, so the pressure is pulling evenly. Now I'm going to let the door sit flat on the bench. That way the clamp is over the tool tray. Okay, joints are tight. Now we'll check our diagonals real quick. We'll just use the inside one. That's 21 and 11/16. 21 and 11/16. Okay, out of the clamps. Now, the final stage is to go in and flush these up. So remember, we planed these, which left the Stiles proud. I'm having to go this way because of grain direction, and I'm using a larger plane so I can take this all off in one pass. And you got to be careful, because if you happen to hit those rails, you're going to tear the fiber. So I'll just watch. And as I get closer to it, I've still got a fair bit to remove. I got more down here to take off than I here, so I'll start right about here. But as I get closer, I'll retract that blade, so I'm not taking as big a shaving. Okay, so that's it for the production of the door. Now, I'm going to leave this. In another video, we're going to go in and actually fit this to the opening. So I'm not going to bother planing the edges. We'll save that for the actual fitting. And we'll obviously finish this after we've done all that as well. But that's a relatively easy frame and panel door. It'll last for decades, if not centuries. You're allowed for expansion of the big panel in the middle. And as long as you didn't leave too little, you'll never have a problem there. A good strong joint up here, mortise and tenon well glued. Just a really rugged way to build a door. Hope that helped. If you like my work, if you like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. And I've always said, better tools make it a whole lot easier. If you click on the icon with the plane and the chisel, it'll take you to our website, introduce you to all of our tools, and also talk to you about our online and in-person workshops. Good luck in your woodwork.